Hello everyone and welcome to episode 6 of ARM Template Masterclass. Hopefully after last week's episode you were able to get your virtual machines deployed. If you had any issues with that, feel free to get in touch. This week we're going to be having a look at a new command, but one that I think is fairly important to being able to learn ARM templates and to help you in this process. And that's the ARM template WhatIf command. So this command is still in preview at the moment, so it's not been available too long. But what it does is it allows you to understand what your template is going to do before you actually deploy it. Without using this command, the only way you can actually confirm that your template deploys what you think it should deploy is to actually deploy the resources. And this can take quite a long time if you're deploying complex things. So the feedback loop to determine that the template you've created is correct and does what you think it does is pretty long. It also adds some expense because you're deploying those resources into Azure, so they are going to cost you money. With the WhatIf command, we can run this and it will look at our template and it will compare it to what's in Azure currently, and it will come back and it will tell us these are all the things that I need to update, create, delete, and so on. And so we can understand that and we can look at that and say, okay, well, I didn't think that that storage account would get created with that name, or that's the wrong size or the wrong region. We can validate all these things without actually deploying the resources. And so for someone who's learning ARM templates, this is a really vital resource. So let's have a look at how we can use it. As I mentioned, the WhatIf command is still in preview, so it's not immediately available in the Azure PowerShell commandlets. We need to install the preview commandlet. So to do that, we're just going to use the install module command in PowerShell to pick up the preview version of these commandlets. So here's the command you need to run. It's as simple as just passing in the required version and then allowing previews, and that will install the right version that has the WhatIf command in it. If you're using the Azure CLI rather than PowerShell, there's also a similar command to install the preview version of that, which has the WhatIf command for CLI. I'll add the link to the documentation for this in the notes below the video. Now we have the right module installed, let's go ahead and use the WhatIf command to see what our deployment's going to do. So I've got our template from last week that we used to create a virtual machine, and I'm going to run the WhatIf command against that. To do this, you use the same command that you used previously to actually deploy the virtual machines. It's not a separate command, it is a flag on the existing command. So we're going to use the new AZ resource group deployment command. We're going to set it up exactly like we would if we wanted to deploy the VM. So you can see we have the same command, putting the resource group name, the name of the deployment, and the files we want to deploy to. But then we're going to append the -whatif command to the end of it. And that changes the command from actually deploying things to just running the WhatIf process. Now I'm doing this deployment against a new empty resource group, so what we should see from the WhatIf command is that it's only going to add some resources. That should be the only things that are changing. There's nothing in there at the minute to be changed or removed. We'll go ahead and run that, and this will take a little bit of time because it's actually going off to Azure and doing a comparison between what you have in your template and what's actually live in Azure. And this is where this command differs from some of the other plan type commands you might have seen before with something like Terraform, where Terraform maintains a state file and it does its comparison against that state file rather than the reality of what's in Azure. So if somebody comes in and manually changes things, that can actually upset Terraform. With this ARM command, that won't happen because we're comparing against what's actually running now. The downside to that is it can take a little bit of time because it's got to go and actually query the fabric and get all that information back. But once that's run, we will get back this big stream of information. And what it's giving us is effectively a JSON representation of what it's going to create. And it's color-coded to help you understand what's happening. So green is additions, orange is deletions or changes, and so on. You'll also see there's a little icon here as well. So you've got a plus icon on the left, which indicates that this is an addition as well. And so we can see at the top level is going to create a virtual machine. But then underneath that, we can see all the properties of the virtual machine. So we can check things like the VM size. So we can see here that we're defining this as a standard D2 v3. So we can validate that against what we thought we were supplying for our parameters file and make sure that's what we expect it to be. We can see the name if we were using some functions to dynamically generate our name like we did with some of the storage accounts. We actually do have a storage account here where the name has been generated using some functions that we discussed previously, including the unique string function, so that if we look at the name, we can check that yes, that name is using the prefix that we expected, it's got a randomly generated name, it's less than the correct character count, and so on. So we can validate all that information by looking at this. Then at the end, we get a summary that just tells us what it's actually going to do. So it's going to create 6 things, and that's all. So we can see from that, from a very high level, what it's going to do. We also do have an option that if we want to, we can reduce the amount of information displayed here. At the moment, this is using the full display mode, and it's giving us all the information for the resources we are deploying. What we can do is set the WhatIf result format parameter. And this has 2 values: full resource payloads, which is what we're seeing here, or resource ID only. Resource ID only will just summarize the results, giving you the IDs of the resources being created, deleted, or updated, but none of the property information. So if we run that, and you'll see here we just get a summary, a list of the resources it's going to create. It's much simpler. So if you were just looking for a top level view, you didn't want all the property information, you could use this as well. Now that I've validated this is WhatIf, I've checked everything's as I expected, so I want to go ahead and deploy this. So if I just run my command and remove the WhatIf part, that will deploy for me. But there's also another flag we could use here if we want to double check our deployment. If we add the confirm flag to the end of our deployment, then actually what will happen is it will run the WhatIf command again, and it will show us the outputs, and then it will ask us if we want to deploy or not. And if we say yes, it will proceed with the deployment. So it gives you an extra check that you can run at deploy time. If you don't want to run the WhatIf separately, you just want to have a validation before you deploy, then you can add the confirm flag and you'll get the summary, and you can enter yes, like I do here, and the deployment will start. I've now deployed that virtual machine, and we're going to make a quick change to it and see how that affects WhatIf. So if you go into our parameters file, and we're going to do something very simple, we're just going to change the VM SKU. So we'll go to the next site up. Save that, and then we'll go back to our CLI, and in here we're just going to run exactly the same WhatIf command that we ran before. Once that's completed, you can see that what we get back this time is a lot simpler. We're not seeing all that information. We're just seeing some information about some changes that are being made. Now, I only changed one thing, and that was the VM size, and we can see that here. We can see on the VM size property we're switching from a D2 v3 to a D4 v3. That's expected. That's the change I was expecting to see here. However, you can also see there are a number of other changes it's highlighting that I didn't make. And this is one of the teething troubles, I guess, and then one of the reasons why the system's still in preview, is that sometimes it will show you this information, that there are changes occurring which you didn't actually ask for. So if we have a look at the one here for the network interface, so the properties here that it's showing as changed, we haven't actually set in the template. Properties here are for the IP configuration of the network interface. And if you remember, this is just a private network interface, so we haven't actually set the IP address or any of this information in our template. We're taking the default, which is what Azure gives to us when it creates the VM. It will allocate a dynamic IP to the VM. But if you query the object in Azure, you will see it has assigned an IP address and an IP4 setting and so on to the VM. So when it's doing a comparison here between our template, which doesn't have this information, and the resources in Azure, which do have this information, it sees a difference. And so it tells us it's going to remove those properties, which in reality, it actually is going to do that. It's going to remove those IP address properties and then get them recreated. And what you might find is you actually get a different IP address because we're using dynamic IPs here. And so this can be a bit confusing because I didn't request this change, but it is showing me that change will be made. So that's just something to be aware of. If you see changes that you're not expecting, have a look at them. They might just be because what's defined in your template doesn't exactly match what's in the portal because there are things Azure's adding that you need to be aware of, or it could be they are just noise that needs to be resolved by the ARM team. And there is actually a GitHub repo where you can raise issues with noise in templates. So if you see things that are being changed that you don't think should be something the user needs to be aware of, do go and raise an issue in the GitHub repo. I'll put the link beneath the video. But this is a really useful tool when you're deploying to an existing resource group, particularly if the resources you've got there are in use and any sort of change you weren't expecting could break things. You can run this WhatIf command and you can see what changes are going to be made, and you can make a decision as to whether this is going to impact your workloads or not. Okay, the last thing I wanted to look at was removal or deletion of resources. But to understand this, we need to look at another concept first, which is deployment modes. So when you run the new AZ resource group deployment command, there are actually 2 modes you can choose from. The default, which is the one we've been using up till now, and if you provide no flag for this, is the incremental mode. Incremental means that when you deploy the template, it will create any resources that are missing. It will amend any resources that are there that have changes on them. But if there are resources in the resource group that are not defined in the template, it will just leave them alone. And you will see them show up as grey in the WhatIf command. That's the default incremental mode that we're using at the moment. And with the incremental mode, you will never see any deletion of resources in your WhatIf command because it doesn't have an option where it will delete things. There is a second deployment mode, however, called complete. And what complete is intended to do is to make your resource group match exactly what is in the ARM template. So if there are resources in the resource group when you deploy that do not exist in the template, they will get deleted. So obviously this can be a bit dangerous if you are manually adding things to resource groups, but if you are in a scenario where you want to make sure that what's in the resource group is exactly what's in your template, then the complete mode can help you do that. And so to demonstrate deletion, we're going to use the complete mode now in our command. And I've gone ahead and created another storage account in our resource group manually so that we can see this in action. So we're just going to run the same WhatIf command as before, but we're going to add the mode flag, and in here we're going to add complete. That's all you have to do to change from incremental to complete. And we'll run that. And you can see now the additional storage account that I created is coming back in orange to indicate that it's going to be deleted. And if we look at the summary, we can see we've got one resource to be deleted. So if I ran this deployment, it would remove that storage account from Azure. So complete mode is a useful tool to be aware of. Most people don't use it most of the time, but it is useful if you need to ensure that what's in your resource group is only what's in your template. And that's the WhatIf tool. Hopefully you can see how that could be really useful for being able to figure out what your template's going to do before it does it and save yourself a bit of time and money when you want to have a better understanding of what your template's going to deploy. If you've got any questions, as always, please feel free to stick them in the comments below. Next week we'll be having a look at how you can debug your templates and how you can fix problems that might occur when you try and deploy your templates. Hopefully I'll see you then. Have a great rest of your day.